Looking for tips and tricks on a new city? Top Dog Tours is the best place to check out walking tours. We are in Boston, Philadelphia, Toronto, and New York City. Visit us on topdogtours.com to book your tour today and check us out on social media for offers, discounts, and pictures. Hi, I'm Nicole Kelly, and this is She Brew in the City. And tonight we are going to talk about two of my favorite things, theater and intergenerational trauma, which in this interview we'll find out they actually go hand in hand. So this is my first interview with more than one guest. So I'm really excited to see how that turns out. So tonight I have John, Jana, and Shany with me, and they are coming from all across the country. So we have multiple time zones as well as multiple people. So how is everybody doing today?
Very good.
Very good. I know John and I had double shifts at the museum today. John and I work at the Museum of Jewish Heritage downtown together, and it was a long day. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me after 2 tours.
I was going to say, I'm surprised we both still have a voice.
I know. I was thinking that about halfway through the second tour. I was like, I have to talk tonight. So I drank some tea, came home and read about transit camps for class, and now I'm here talking to you guys.
I just love that you love intergenerational trauma so much, because so do I. It's awful to say that.
It's a real thing.
It's such a passion. So I see you.
Yes, we're gonna talk about that. I come with my own intergenerational trauma because my family fled the pogroms, and my mother dealt with 20th century antisemitism in America. So I feel like there's remnants of that. And I've talked about how my mom wouldn't say the word Hanukkah aloud in public, and I'd make fun of her. And now I'm like, that's valid. That is a very valid thing. Yeah. Which you know, we'll all talk about how we deal with our intergenerational trauma, I'm sure, on this episode. So I always start off by asking everybody what their Jewish upbringing was like, where they grew up, if they grew up with a denomination, if they had a bar or bat mitzvah. So we'll go ahead. We'll start alphabetically. We'll start with Jana.
Okay. Yes. So I was like, am I first? I'm never first.
Yes, you're first alphabetically.
So I always characterize my upbringing as being raised culturally Jewish.
Okay.
I did go to a Jewish day school from kindergarten to 8th grade. So that's my religious moment, but we weren't really religious in the house. But I wore uniforms to school. We ate kosher food in school. We prayed in the morning. We prayed before we ate. We ate Hebrew and Judaics every day. But I didn't keep kosher in the house, and we would go to temple on the high holidays. And then once I got bat mitzvahed, it was like,
you were like, that's it, I'm done.
They were like, I didn't, no discussion was had. It just, religion was gone. Like, that was it. Now it was like, that was that. And I graduated middle school and went to an arts high school, and that was that. So the way that I feel Jewish in my upbringing is, the Holocaust was the main thing. That was like the center point. I was raised around probably immediate. I was raised around like 15 Holocaust survivors. That was my socialization. And then for big events, it was like 60 of them. So that's kind of all I know about Judaism is our Yiddish speaking Polish Holocaust survivors. And I deeply love it, and I miss it. And so, Judaism to me is their language. It's our humor. It's how we relate to each other. It's unfiltered. It's honest. It's pure. It's judgmental. It's, the love of food and the addiction to food is, that's everyone's love language. So that's really, and then from Jewish school and how I was raised, the values, which we've all spoken about, the three of us, is really tikkun olam. Like it's how I was raised, and it's how I was taught in school what it meant to be Jewish. And that's the most lasting thing I carry with me in my life.
And where did you grow up?
Boca Raton, Florida.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm like the quintessential, I'm the anti-Jap.
For those of you that don't know what Jap means, means Jewish American princess.
Yeah.
It does not mean a Japanese person.
I didn't even know that.
It's a very American thing.
Yes,
and
terrible.
It's like a shiksa. It's hard to explain, but you know it when you see it. There are a lot of moms at my daughter's school who were Japs, and they're very cliquey. And I'm like
They're
a
the
borderline Jap when I want to be. I don't roll into school looking like a Jap. So I isolate with that.
Yeah.
All right, John, I know a little bit about your background. Can you share with my listeners where you grew up and about your Jewish upbringing?
Yeah, I mean, usually when people ask me, where are you from? I usually either say it's a two-part answer or how long do you have? Because it's kind of weird. I was born in Houston, Texas, actually, to a Presbyterian father and a Jewish mother. So it was an interfaith marriage. But luckily, it was not a shanda for the Jewish family. It was not a dishonor or a scandal. So I actually grew up for the first 10 years of my life in a town where we were the only Jewish family in the town. It was technically a very small town, about an hour and a half outside of Houston, and we were the only Jews in the town. We did attend Sunday school at a synagogue in Houston called Congregation Beth Israel, which actually, at least when we were there, was the largest Reform congregation in the United States. We would go there for Sunday school every Sunday. We'd drive an hour and a half into Houston. It was imperative to my mother and actually weirdly to my father that we were raised fully Jewish. So we never had a Christmas tree in the house. We never decorated or celebrated, Christmas or Easter. We would go over to my father's family's houses sometimes for Christmas dinners, or we would give them presents or exchange presents, but they made it abundantly clear that we do not celebrate that because we are Jewish, which, nothing will make a person more into an artist than being the only one in a town who, is not like everybody else. But then my mother is Jewish, and she's actually was born in Australia, and her parents are Polish Holocaust survivors that immigrated to Australia after the war. And their raising was actually very more cultural. They were definitely not religious by any means, and neither were we. We were very much Reform primarily, but we actually then moved back to Australia, and that's a whole other story as to why. But when we moved to Australia, my mother was sort of very much even more adamant that me and my sister received a Jewish education. So we went to a Reform Hebrew day school, and I actually was there from 5th grade through the rest of high school. It went K through 12. And so I did my bar mitzvah through there. I also sort of felt like it was kind of like after my bar mitzvah, all bets were off. I could kind of do whatever I wanted. I
feel like we all felt free in some capacity.
A little bit.
Though I want to say, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, this says a lot about my Jewish guilt. I have stress dreams about not graduating Hebrew school. I absolutely graduated Hebrew school, and I'm almost 40, and I will occasionally have dreams where I have not fulfilled the requirements to graduate Hebrew school.
Oh my gosh, you're in school for the Holocaust. You're good.
I am good. I also went to Hebrew High 2 years after I had my bar mitzvah. So like the Jewish education did not end. But
I've still definitely had the high school nightmares when
but like it's weird being about specifically like Hebrew school. Like I don't know if I've ever met somebody else like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, I sort of felt like it was a little bit sort of all bets were off after that. I always joke that like 2 days after my bar mitzvah, I tried bacon for the first time. And unfortunately, I've never gone back.
How was the bacon?
It was delicious.
It was great. Okay, good.
Yeah, it was kind of extraordinary. But yeah, so and it was sort of very interesting because I sort of felt like actually going through high school and then into college, I sort of felt like I kind of retreated a little bit from my Judaism, mainly I think because I was in such an insular, the Jewish community in Melbourne in particular is very insular and very, all of the places that we live in, the ghetto, because literally everybody lives in, 4-mile radiuses of one another. So I felt like by the end of high school, I very much actually wanted to get out of it. Mm-hmm. I was very much wanting to sort of find out who I was outside of all of it. And when I went to drama school to study musical theater, I sort of was like, oh, this is, I felt like I finally kind of found my tribe.
Yeah.
I kind of found my people. And I kind of went away from specifically Judaism and like attending Seders and missing, Rosh Hashanahs and Yom Kippurs and seeing my Jewish friends, just because I thought, I was like, no, the theater is my religion now. I sort of got a bit high and mighty about it. But then actually, I think COVID was an incredible coincidence, but I actually really started, something changed, and I don't know what, but it was trying to find ways to actually reintroduce myself to it, just even by just ingesting a lot of Jewish stories, a lot of Jewish history, and really then also, as my grandfather was getting older, really taking the time to really spend as much time with him as I could before he actually ended up passing away, but very, not tragically, at the age of 98. So, he lived a long life. But I definitely felt I almost kind of had a renewed appreciation and understanding. I still don't necessarily call myself very religious, but culturally, I've actually probably never felt more Jewish than now.
I had a similar experience after my daughter was born, because I, like you, I was like, the theaters, these are my people. And because I was, I think, a little burnt out. And then when we had our daughter, I was like, well, what do I want my family, life to look like? And I feel like after COVID, I was looking for some sort of connection. So I found our synagogue in the Upper West Side. We moved to the neighborhood to be close to the synagogue. She goes to the school now. And I feel like I have tripled down on the Judaism, which is like what I was like when I was a kid, because my mom was convinced I was going to become a cantor.
Oh my God, that's all they wanted me to do. They were like, don't go into the arts, but just be a cantor. And I was like, what's singing?
There's no money in clergy work. I have discovered this, though there is a synagogue which is a conservative synagogue in the San Fernando Valley, where apparently, I don't know if he's still there, the head rabbi made $1 million a year because someone had left an endowment. Wow. But that's not normal. Nope. That's not normal.
He won the lottery, didn't he?
I know, right? Okay, Shany, how about you? Where did you grow up, and what was your Jewish upbringing like?
All right. So I'm originally from Israel. So I would say I grew up secular, very, very open. We did celebrate all the holidays. It was just kind of all around us. So we don't really talk about our Judaism because most of us are Jewish. So it was just part of my life. Nothing very, very specific. We are not religion, but we did do all of the traditions. So all of the, Seder, Rosh Hashanah, the whole shebang. But it's more family rooted. So we always went to family. We always gathered together. And that's basically it. In Israel, because most of the people are Jewish, it kind of, you don't really go into it much. You learn it in school, you'll learn about your past and all of that, but it's just obvious that it's part of your life. So I think that when I moved to the States, that's when I felt a little out of place in a way. Some people celebrate. I mean, we do have Jewish people in America, right? But it's completely different way to celebrate. Even the food is different. The whole tradition around it is completely different. And to be honest, at first I tried to kind of take a step back because I just didn't feel like I belong to that Jewish community. And I didn't feel like it's not that I felt, but I'm not part of the American culture that is not Jewish, right? And so I was kind of in the middle, so I kind of just did my own thing. During holidays, it just felt very lonely because I did move by myself, but that was kind of my experience. I didn't really get into it. I'm very, Jana and John knows me, but I'm very particular. I do my work and I just, I'm very specific. I'm going to class, I'm work, I'm doing my auditions, I create my work, and I just focus on that. Try not to fall into emotions too much, which is very much probably part of my trauma, generational trauma, right? Yeah, I'm more of a hard person.
I've known the Israeli people I know are pretty no nonsense. I feel like that comes from not only the intergenerational trauma of a lot of Israelis being descendants of Holocaust survivors, but living in an area that's kind of fraught with a lot of things going on constantly.
All the time. Yeah, all the time. It's just it's part of who we are. I don't know if it's good or bad. It's just is. So I think that's kind of my background. I moved to the States at 2013 when I started AMDA, actually. And from there, I stayed during COVID. I met my husband in Israel, and we stayed in Israel for about 3 years until we kind of found what we want to do, and we came back together. And now we have our daughter. She's 10 weeks old. And actually, I really, I felt what you said about, like, once you had your daughter, you're like, what am I doing, you know? So that's kind of what we're thinking now. I mean, she's 10 weeks old, but we still think, like, okay, how our life is going to look like, especially here in the States? Like, are we going, like, Jewish American style? Are we completely trying to, like, open up to everything else, especially with the years now and everything that is going on with the antisemitism that is growing again? So it's a huge question, and it's very interesting, and that's something that we are working through right now. So it's very, very interesting.
One thing you'll figure out as she's growing up, and I never thought that I'd have this emotional reaction, but because my daughter's in Jewish day school, she's learning things, and like Purim just happened, and I was like, what do we do? But Purim, what was the deal with Haman? She's like, he wanted us to bow down, and I started crying. Because I'm having like these very visceral reactions to her learning about Judaism. And I feel like I cry over everything. There was like this door that was unlocked in acting school. And now I just literally cry all the time. I cry at like the Yoheved Loom. Like I like lost it yesterday. I was like, I can't today. I cannot. There's this little girl who died when she was murdered when she was 6. And we use a toy as like a device to talk about children murdered in the Holocaust. And like some days I cannot deal with it.
And especially seeing their reactions to seeing some people's reactions to it as well is also really like that also breaks your heart as much as just saying what happened to.
Yeah, because people kind of having, especially children having this realization like, wow, like I would have been killed is crazy. But as she grows up, it'll be interesting to see your reaction to her learning about things because it goes so quick. You're probably feeling like you're never going to get any sleep again, but I promise it will happen.
Yes.
I did not believe people, but my daughter sleeps through the night now, and it's a magical experience.
But I do want to say something interesting going off. We can edit it later. But something that is very interesting about how we're thinking now is my sister asked me, she's like, so are you going to talk Hebrew at home or are you going to talk English? Are you going to read to her in English, in Hebrew? So we kind of do both because we don't know yet. Yeah. We said we're probably going to speak Hebrew in the house. And then when she goes to school, she's probably going to be spoken in English. So it's just very interesting to kind of think forward.
So let's jump into the main topic. You are all 3Gs. And for those of you that have not listened to previous episodes, I have a great one with 3GNY's President Elizabeth Kamens. These are grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. So they're 3G, so the third generation. I want all of you to talk a little bit about your grandparent or grandparents' experience, where they're from, what happened during the war, and a little bit about what their lives were like post-1945.
Gosh, I get even, it's such a good balance. Shany needs us and we need Shany. I get even a little emotional just having you introduce us as 3G, like the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. It's just, such a special thing in all of our lives. My grandmother's name was Rose. My grandpa's name was Ben. And they both are from Lodz, Poland. Łódź is how you'd say it. Which is actually where John's grandparents are also from, which is wild. So we think we're related.
They're the Jewish geography. We are all related. I think in some aspects. So it's possible that you could do a test of distant cousins.
I think we should.
So my grandparents both entered the ghetto at like 11 and 12. all of their families. My grandmother had, I think she had like 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and my grandfather had 3 sisters. And they both, it's so interesting. My grandmother was really harsh and strict and fearful, and she was that one. And then my grandfather was the sweetest, most patient, kindest, gentlest man. And as I got older and re-listened to their stories, who knows why, what, when, but she definitely had it harder, I think. I mean, how can you compare, but than he did. So, she would tell little stories of them trying to steal potatoes from neighbors in the ghetto, or share, or, burrow them in from somewhere, whatever. Not steal from neighbors, steal from somewhere and share with their neighbors. That's kind of the most she would talk about it. And then in the interviews I watched, this is horrible. Her father refused to eat in the ghettos, so they could, and so that's how he died, which I can only imagine the guilt that she carried through. So that's part of their story. Then they went to, I don't know what camps first, but my grandmother went through Bergen-Belsen and she went through Auschwitz.
I just learned that Bergen-Belsen at one point was a transit camp, so it's possible that she went there first. But then again, a lot of, like, Anne Frank was taken from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, so they were all passing people around. So yeah. Okay, so she was in Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz.
She had some crazy stories. So anyways, the lines, and so she was taken one way, and she was separated from her family at the Get. So I think she was in the ghetto for 3 to 4. I mean, they went in at 1939, and then they went into the camps at 1944. So they were in the ghetto for a lot of years. Okay. And so she was like 12 when that happened. So she went into the camps around 16 or something, if my math's correct. 17. I think she got out of the war at 18 or 19. It's all of her, young adolescent years were the war. And she has this other story of being in one of the camps, and like the fence, the chain, the metal fence, and was separating her in this other section. And she saw a friend that she knew on the other side. And the girl said, come, like, because she's like, are you alone? And my grandmother said, yeah. She goes, come to our side, like, come stay with us. And my grandmother was too afraid to do it, so she didn't. And the next day, like, that whole section had been, like, murdered and, like, gone to the gas chambers.
So I have a crazy story about my great grandmother in World War I, because she was from, I don't know, Russia, in a place that no longer exists. Like, I've Googled the town and it's no longer there. So she was one of 7 daughters, and the last one died, and she was like, the devil was always trying to get me because I was the one, like, that got away. And apparently, because there's a bunch of bombings during World War I, her mother was always like, if there's bombings, you have to come to the shelter near our house. So she's out playing in the fields, like you do in Russia in 1916. And there was an air raid, and her friend was like, no, let's go to the shelter together. She's like, no, I told my mom I have to go to the one near our house. So they parted ways. And when she came out, that shelter that her friend wanted her to go to had been bombed and everyone had died. So I feel
that's so
like
much of all these survival stories are all just these random acts of.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's a book I'm reading right now by Deborah Dwock, who is a genius. She's running the graduate program for Holocaust studies at CUNY now, about how this idea of people who survived were smarter or better or cleverer, because a lot of it's luck. It's decisions that people made. It's decisions that camp guards made. It's decisions that, you wouldn't even have thought about in a split second. So a lot of people survived because they were just lucky.
Or lucky. It's just, such a thing of life, just a split second randomness to say, yeah. I think that's why survivor's guilt existed for all of them, because they know, they're like, what did I do to deserve to be alive? So she had some crazy stories like that. And then she survived. She was liberated. And she got taken in by these 3 sisters who survived, by 2 sisters. So they called her the third sister. And that's when she met my grandfather, what they met in Germany after the war. My grandfather in the same town went into the ghetto at the same age with his family. And he became like a messenger. So he would ride his bike and help deliver mail to a Nazi, I believe. Like he had a semi-important job, so he would get some extra food for his family. So he had that kind of experience. Then him and his family, they got sent to the camps. He also went through, I know he was in Auschwitz for a little while, and Birkenau. That someone was in Birkenau at some point. The thing that about him that's pretty beautiful is that him and his father went through the entire experience together through the camps up until 2 months before liberation. His father passed away. Yeah. But so I think even that too, just like the way he moved through life and thinking about how he got to have his dad with him through all of it up until the end, I think has a big impact on the way he was in the world compared to my grandmother. And so then they met, to the best of their knowledge, all of their families were gone. They met in Germany again. My grandfather found a cousin, Leo, somewhere. And they got on a train and found these three sisters. Their stories were, they all went back home just to look, like, let's just go back. Maybe someone's there. Maybe someone's alive. So on their way back to or from, they met these three sisters, and my grandmother being the adopted one. And they all kind of like stayed together in apartments. And, that's where they always kind of get like shy about the story. And I'm like, well, did you fall in love? Like it's okay if something happened. But so, after soon discovering that there were no family members left, they got so lucky. They got papers to America very quickly. And all of them together got on a boat to Ellis Island. And yeah, they finagled their way and came here. And my grandparents have a cool story, whether or not it's exactly historically true to down to the very specifics. They were known to be the first survivor couple ever to be married in America after World War II. So their wedding pictures in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And we have New York Times articles about their wedding, and it was a beautiful kind of commemorated thing. And that took place at what is now known to be the Public Theater, because it used to be a Jewish tenement house for the refugees to come over. And there was a little temple inside. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I didn't know that. We give a tour, we talk about the Public Theater, so now I have to add that in to,
Yeah, and like that's where they started their American life. And they were, they left the past in that sense, and they came here and we're going to start anew. And my grandfather became a furrier's assistant, and my grandmother was a seamstress, and they lived in the Lower East Side on Eldridge Street. And I think their way of surviving was staying with their kind. So I never met a friend of my grandparents that was not a Holocaust survivor. Like that, they only were with survivors. And that's how I think they made it through. They took English classes at night. They, the highest, I think it was called, they had organizations. My grandfather was the treasury. That was what they kept them going. And then they moved to the Bronx, had my mom and her brother, and then they moved to Bayside, Queens, and but they all moved together, like all of their close group. And then it was upstate New York, the Catskills, which is where I was born, and then down to Florida for the full retirement, which is where
they're hitting all of the Jewish cornerstones. They started in Poland, they came to the Lower East Side, they went to Queens, or the Catskills in Florida. They checked all the boxes. When you're talking about interviews with your grandmother, are you talking about the ones done through the Shoah Foundation? How did that feel watching that? Because my third grade Hebrew school teacher was an Auschwitz survivor, and she gave testimony, and I have to contact an organization to watch it and just say I'm a master's student, I'm writing a paper or whatever. But like just seeing that little thumbnail of this woman made me really emotional. And she was not my grandmother. So how did that feel watching that?
It's like I'm in the video. Like this was, when I say this was my world, like it's so funny because my mom didn't grow up that way. Like she found the photo album of their wedding. She wasn't told about it. I remember being 7 or 8 and them sitting us down and being like, this is who you are. This is your history. Blah, blah, blah. So we're in the end of it when they're talking about who their family is. You can see me as like a 7-year-old girl and my sister who's 10 sitting on their laps. So like, and I remember that day, actually. I remember it being really important and my mom telling us, like, be quiet and da-da-da. and then, we interviewed them for middle school. So it was not always talked about, but it was talked about. But I remember watching it through for the first time, and it's insanely emotional. It's so hard. It's so, it's just so sad. It's so, 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 so sad. And then I rewatched it at different times in my life. And before writing my show, I was like, okay, here we go. And I think it was over COVID. And, there's like 2-3 DVDs for each of their stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely hard, but it feels so important. And you also feel so like, because even though they would talk about it, they wouldn't go into that detail. They were doing this once, like that was understood. It's like, I'm doing this once and one time only for you to get this on record, and I'm never going to do it like this again, So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. John, you're up.
Yes. Incredibly. Just like Jana's grandparents, my mother's parents were survivors. My grandfather was from Lodz or Łódź with his family, but my grandmother was actually born in Białystok, which is in the northeast.
Of the famous bread and the producer from the producers.
The producers, exactly right. Exactly right. And they didn't meet until actually liberation. And I mostly know more about my grandfather's story than my grandmother's, mainly also because my grandmother just wouldn't talk about it after the war. I actually never knew her. She died in 1983 before I was born, sadly of cancer. So I never got to hear her testimony. But my grandfather was also interviewed by the Shoah Foundation, I think, in 1997.
For those of you listening who don't know what the Shoah Foundation is, someone asked me today what my dream job would be, one of the kids, and I was like, running the Shoah Foundation. So life goals. I told my husband we can retire to LA and I'll run the Shoah Foundation. So if you are working for the Shoah Foundation listening, I'm going to be your future boss. So after Schindler's List was produced, Steven Spielberg realized that a lot of survivors, we were losing them. So he created a foundation, which is now run with USC, and they went around interviewing thousands of survivors. And some of this testimony is 4 or 5 hours long. And there's about 1,500 interviews available online. And there are about 5,000 more, I think, that are available through institutions like schools and museums. And you can request to see them if you have a family member. And a lot of the work I do in school is involving testimonies from these videos. And a lot of the books I'm reading involves testimony from these videos, because as someone like me who is entering Holocaust scholarship after a lot of these people have since passed away, this is really the only information I have for research. So thank you to your grandparents for doing this, because it's so informative and important for people who are studying this and to use in educational settings. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I just wanted to make sure people knew what that was.
No, absolutely. Definitely. My grandfather was the youngest of 4 kids. And they lived in a very non-Jewish part of Lodz. And they also were moved into the Lodz ghetto when the Nazis invaded. And his oldest brother, actually, my great uncle, managed to actually escape to Russia when they invaded, because he was quite a bit older and he already had a wife. And because he was also actually a communist, so he was actually.
It was a good place for him.
Yeah, it was a good place for him. I mean, he was still sent to a work camp.
Yes.
in Russia, but he managed to also survive, actually. And my grandfather became the breadwinner of his family inside the ghetto. He was about maybe 17 or 18 when the war started, and he essentially started working as a builder and construction man for this person who became his kind of boss and mentor, and who ended up essentially, being his first savior, because he gave him a trade to be able to support him and his family, and they were able to, keep as much food as they possibly could, as well as keeping them from the transports, a lot of the transports. Until when the ghetto was liquidated in August 1944, they were taken to Birkenau in Auschwitz, and my grandfather was there for 2 weeks and did watch his parents as well as his older brother and sister be sent to the gas chambers. He was actually stopped by Joseph Mengele, nicknamed the Angel of Death, who sent people either to the right or to the left. He was holding his grandfather's waist, and they sent his grandfather. They sent his father to the left, and my grandfather went with him. And then Mengele stopped him, pulled him aside, and said, "No, you go work first. You'll die anyway, but first you go work." And that was the last time he saw his father. And he actually managed to survive the lines for the gas chambers twice. Because also, luckily, he managed to do a lot of favors for people in the ghetto. He actually had quite a bit of clout with his construction business. Until finally, two people actually managed to wake him up and get him out of Auschwitz onto a work transport that was taking people to work in a coal mine in Falkenberg in Germany, where then he was then moved on to Bergen-Belsen. And he developed typhus there and was very close to death, and then was obviously liberated there. And I know that from what I know about my grandmother, she and her sister actually survived together. She had a younger sister named Gitta, and she survived with her, but her mother was murdered in Treblinka, and her father was murdered in Majdanek. And they
For
also,
those of you who saw A Royal Pain, that's the camp that they go to is Majdanek.
yes. And actually, what was funny enough that you mentioned A Real Pain, I had the most visceral reaction watching that because I don't know if you know about the program March of the Living, but I went on March of the Living when I was 17 to Poland, and when we went to Majdanek, and now that especially that I had that knowledge, and then seeing that in A Real Pain actually was incredibly, it affected me physically in a way that I really didn't expect, because I was just like, oh yes, I remember I was there.
What was so interesting about that is that scene after they leave the camp and just everyone's reaction. And I feel like all of those reactions are valid, because we did a trip in 2018 where we spent 3 weeks in Germany and Poland and visited Dachau and Auschwitz. And I feel like just that kind of like defeated, it's like, how you feel after that.
What do you do? That's crazy. But then they, all then managed to actually find their way into Bergen-Belsen. And my grandmother was incredibly lucky. She was actually able to work a lot in the kitchens as well, and she was also a very gifted seamstress. So she was actually able to do very much easier jobs, so it wasn't as much of a toll on her health. And when the DP camp for Bergen-Belsen was created, she was one of the few that was actually well enough to help the soldiers. And she actually helped nurse my grandfather back to health, and that's how they met.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah. And
I love Holocaust survivor love stories, because I feel like
it's crazy, right?
Very hopeful in a way.
I mean, that's the thing too, is that it like, just
think of these young people who'd been through like literally the worst thing that ever happened in the history of humankind, and then they meet other people after when they've lost their entire families, and they're able to create their own families, like Jana was saying, of this group of survivors that they met.
The fact that they can, even get to that point where they can trust anybody again, or where they can love in that way was just amazing. So they actually left the DP camp together after about 3 months and moved to Frankfurt in Germany, where they just worked and tried to save enough money to leave the country. And they had my auntie, their first daughter in Salzheim, and then they managed. At first, actually got visas to go to Israel. However, then that was actually at the time when my grandmother was pregnant with my aunt, and then Israel then actually rejected them because they needed fighters. They needed people that could work and could also work in the army. They couldn't have expecting mothers. And
I feel like pregnant Israeli women can fight in the army. They're pretty tough.
100%.
Yep.
But then actually what happened was that a friend that also of my grandmother's that also survived, who came from Bialystok, knew that there was a Bialystok center in Melbourne, Australia, that was actually able to sponsor them over. And so that's where they decided to go. They moved to Melbourne in 1950. My grandfather always used to say as well, he said he chose that as well because he wanted to get as far away from Europe as humanly possible. And there is nowhere farther from anything on earth than Australia. And my mother was born there in Melbourne in 1955. And they also went about rebuilding their lives. Many of their close friends were survivors, and they also kind of became surrogate aunties and uncles and cousins to my mom and my auntie. All called them Auntie Lodja, Auntie Henya, Uncle Max. Like they were all family, even though they weren't, blood. And what my mom and my auntie remember a lot is that they had so many parties in their house. They grew up in a house full of parties where they had their friends over on Saturday nights, and they would go well into the morning, and then people would be, drunkenly hungover, sleeping on the couches, and then my grandfather would be down at 6 a.m. making scrambled eggs for the people who had stayed over, and my mom and my auntie would just come down just being like, what is going on? So they really actually took their youth back when they came. I mean, they worked like dogs, and they made sure that they were really good examples for my mom and my auntie, but they also they wanted to have fun. Yeah. They wanted to drink, they wanted to party, they wanted to enjoy the life that they had managed to live, to save. And they were incredibly serious about that, and incredibly serious about my mom and my auntie getting a good education, because their education was
taken away from them.
Away from them. Yeah.
So you have a story that you told me about your grandfather having an altercation with the infamous Chaim Rumkowski, who was basically the leader of the ghetto and a terrible, terrible person. You can Google him for more information. Yeah. Someone in a class I'm taking was kind of trying to be sympathetic, and I used this story. I was like, this is something that happened. He was not a good person. And, I was wondering if you'd share that story.
Yeah. So one day when my grandfather was working in the ghetto, overseeing a building of actually apartment complexes outside the ghetto, one of his workers actually came up to him and said, I was in Auschwitz. And my grandfather said, what's Auschwitz? I've never heard of that before. And he was an escaped person that managed to come back to Lodz. Wow. To get this work, and he said they're gassing Jews. Wow. There. This probably was maybe 42, late 42. And my grandfather, didn't know what to do, so he went to his boss because he trusted him with his life. And he said, this man told me that there's a place called Auschwitz where they're gassing Jews. And then his boss, Gutman, said, let's take this to Rumkowski. Let's tell him. So my grandfather and his boss went to Chaim Rumkowski, and they said, we heard from this man that that the reason also why there are so many deportations that have started to happen in this ghetto is because they're taking people away to gas Jews. Rumkowski comes up from behind the table, walks across in front of my father, and smacks him across the face, essentially stating that he said he was a liar. You're lies. This is not true. How can you say such a thing? And if you bring this up again, you're going out of the ghetto. And then all of a sudden, my grandfather says he never saw a man lose his cool so much than his boss, who then railed against Rumkowski, saying, how dare you slap this young boy? He is doing this, And they essentially, he got Rumkowski actually to calm down and let it go. Even as so much at one point, Rumkowski a few maybe weeks later come over with actually a little bit of extra food and money to give to my grandfather. My grandfather said, I don't want it.
Wow.
For those of you that don't know, this is a man who didn't even make it to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. He was beaten by the Sotar commando who recognized him because of the things he had done. His famous "Give us your children," give your children speech, because he was basically told he had to come up with, I think it was 5,000 people by the Germans. And he basically was like, he gave this whole speech about asking parents to give their children. That's crazy. That story is crazy. Wow.
Wow.
All right, Shani, your turn.
I feel like we're saying about every story. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, because it's
It's just
crazy. It's an
because it is
unprecedented. It's an
crazy.
unprecedented event, and
No, yeah.
Yeah.
God willing, something like this never happens again. But it never happened before. It is, in my opinion, the worst thing that has ever happened in human history. It is the most infamous crime in history, and I've never heard a story from someone who was a survivor or refugee that I did not think was crazy. And I think
so highly or so sophisticated and highly, because shit happens everywhere. Excuse my language. The craziness, but it's not so sophisticated
Planned.
and organized to the umpteenth level. Anyways, yeah, it's
yes.
All right. So, my family, I'm going to talk about two of my grandparents because my grandfather from my mom's side also went through the Holocaust, but we don't know as much on his story, unfortunately. And so in my show that I'm doing as well, I'm focusing on my grandfather from my father's side, Emmanuel Dagan, and my grandmother from my mother's side, Lili Alter. And so I'm going to start with my grandma. She was also the closest person to me growing up. And her interview was with Yad Vashem in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do have her testimony full. That's the first time I saw her testimony was when I was 12. And in Israel, we do what we call Avodat Shorashim, which is basically we're going backwards and learning about our history, the tree. And so my sisters, I have two sisters, they already did that before me, but I've decided I'm going to go a little bit deeper. And that's when I found Yad Vashem testimonies, and I kind of learned a lot more and got more into the history of the family. And my grandma's upbringing was actually in Romania and was beautiful. They were very, very rich at the time. She was one of the most beautiful women. She was not even a woman. She was 12, but she was the most beautiful one in the area. Like, it was very known. My grandma was just like I don't even know how to say it. She was just like breathtaking. Even growing like as a grandma, she was breathtaking. And she was a very hard woman, but a very warm woman. So she was hard on the exterior, but very warm inside. And especially to me, because she was the one that I grew up with. And so my grandma was sorry, my English is a little bit all over the place at this time.
I speak one language. I'm not going to judge you, though I have to learn German for my doctorate, so that'll be fun. I'll just start yelling at my daughter in German.
Since pregnancy, I was just like,
yeah, no, your brain, you literally lose this, again, something I did not believe that my mother told me. Your brain dies. Your part of your brain dies
completely. And so my grandma had, I would say she was lucky. And the fact that I'm saying she was lucky is because the whole family survived. But it was not an easy time at all. They ran away from Romania. Altogether, they were split along the way for a few years, and then they found each other. And once they found each other, she ran away with her brother, and Bruno, who also was sick in the meantime, and she took care of him. It seemed like he's not going to survive, and then eventually they were in the heights, so she was able to kind of take care of him as they were hidden. And it's kind of unknown how they survived, but they just ran from one ghetto to another. They were caught, they ran away again, they were caught again, they ran away again. She because she was so pretty, she managed to hide her Jewishness, although she was very Jewish growing up, but she was able to to have more food because the soldiers, the Romanian soldiers and the Germans kind of fell in love with her. So she was really like lucky. Lucky is a big word to say in the Holocaust, but that was something that worked for her. The fact that she was so pretty. And so we keep talking about how pretty she was because it was basically how she survived. And so after that, they decided to stay in Romania. And they went back to the house. The house was not theirs anymore, and it was ruined, of course, and everything was taken. And from being very rich and have this like very beautiful house, she kept talking about the piano. The piano was the grand piano in the living room. It was all taken by Germans, and nothing stayed. And they become poor, and they kind of don't know how to live. And she met my grandfather at the time, and they stayed in Romania for 3 more years. And after that, they decided to move to Israel, or like to take a boat to Israel, and that's how they survived. And they just started a family in Israel. And so my grandfather, Immanuel Dagan, he grew up in Odessa, and he actually grew up the exact opposite. He was very, very Russian. They call him the Russian, Immanuel. And they were very poor. They actually splitted a house with another family, a very small house. Imagine a New York studio apartment split into 2, kind of. But he's talking about his life before the Holocaust as very happy home, very warm, lots of food on the table, although they were not very able. I mean, his father kept on going to work and worked really hard, and they had potatoes all the time, and it was kind of he remembers it very, very happy times, although it was very poor. And so the bombing kind of caught him in the middle of camp. He was 9-year-old, and the reason why I say the bombing is because it just started. Bombs just started to fall. And it was just a crazy, like, sudden behavior. So he didn't really know what to do, and he ran home, and his parents didn't believe that something like the Holocaust can happen. They heard things. They heard that it started in Romania, it started in Germany. Jews are being killed and being taken out of the house, but his parents didn't believe that someone will do something like that. And they remember that, I don't remember exactly the year, but I think it was 1930. There were a few Germans that lived nearby, and they were friends with them. So they couldn't really imagine a world where those kind of people that they're friends with will become their enemies. So my grandfather, at 9 years old, said, I think we need to run away. And his parents said, no, we're going to stay. They're going to vouch for us because, they're friends. And that was the point also in the show, that he's deciding to leave the house, and his mom says, okay, you can run away, just in case, kind of find a place to hide. And he took his backpack, and he just left at 9-year-old, just walked away. So after that, he found out that his parents were killed. And it was just, he felt guilty that he didn't stay and like make them come with him at 9-year-old. So that's just a crazy, crazy story. After that, he just ran from one place to another, and he was caught a few times being taken to working camps But every time he was taken to a camp, he managed to run away. He was very thin at the time, so he jumped in between the I don't know what the name of it, but there were on the train they had those sticks. What's the name of the sticks?
The bars on the windows.
Thank you. The bars.
I've heard stories of people squeezing through the bars on the windows, or people
Yes.
throwing their children out of the windows from the trains, which is also crazy.
So he threw himself out of the bars, in between the bars, because he was so thin. He said he's kind of when we were a little older, he never spoke about it, but then we heard it during the testimony. So actually, he changed his story 3 times, telling us, because it was so horrible. The time that we actually found out what really happened was when he told the story to Yad Vashem, and we heard it after he passed. The real story. So the stories that we wrote about him during our Avodat Shorashim at the age of 12, when we learned about the history, were not true. It was all his stories in a really nice way being told. He just jumped from the train. He ran away again. He worked for people to hide his Jewish background, and he said he was just, a lonely boy who doesn't have a family. It was quite crazy. But the really interesting story is that he joined the partisans eventually when he was 11, and that's kind of what saved him. So he was with the partisans. He was a soldier at 11 years old, and they took care of him and put him into the Silvino house, which is a whole story as its own. Silvino children is there's a book about it. There's also a movie being done, and it's basically refers to approximately like 810 children, Jewish children, that were taken to Israel after that. So it's a very interesting story, and there are 810 stories there. So I suggest to go and read about it. But that's what saved him, and he got to Israel, and in Israel he was a very happy boy, but a crazy one. So everyone kept calling him Emmanuel Arussi, which is the Russian Emmanuel, because he didn't know a word in Hebrew, but he studied on its own, and his level of Hebrew was probably one of the highest levels, because he studied from Torah, and he just wanted to be the best, know the best, and he wanted to stop speaking Russian. He didn't want to have any connection to his past. He wanted to black completely. So he only spoke Hebrew, very, very bad Hebrew, but he spoke only Hebrew. And so that's how he kind of learned, and he completely didn't want to remember anything that happened. And he was very quiet when I was born. I just remember that he barely spoken, but you can see behind his eyes the love and everything he wanted to say. He just gave big hugs. You knew that how he felt, So yeah, that's basically the story.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
I want to ask, because we had mentioned intergenerational trauma, your parents were all 2Gs. So do you think your parents were affected by what happened to their parents? And did that affect how they raised you? John's grinning.
Yeah.
I love how we're both laughing at that.
Because if we don't laugh, we cry. So we'll
No,
do that.
but that's to be Jewish. That is to be Jewish, and that's why we make great comedians. Because if we don't joke about things, we have to think about it, and then we cry.
Yeah.
That's just culturally what we do.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely. What's really interesting though is that I think, at least from what my mom told me, she was very sort of outspoken, very much a go-getter, was kind of seen as a little bit of a, she was a rebel and a hippie, and she, marched in the streets against Vietnam. And I think she was incredible. She was the activist of the family. But I had noticed that as, me and my sister have come up and gotten older, and particularly, I think she's been getting so much more, scared in the last few years, because I think she always really thought that, we'll never experience such hate again. And my papa would always tell her, history repeats itself all the time. And she was just like, no, it's going to be okay. But now I do think as she gets older, she does get more nervous about, the anti-Semitic events around the world. And she, I think, fears for me and my sister's safety sometimes, even if it's, actually not probably based in fact. But I think, there's definitely a feeling of, we have a mark on our back, always in some form. And, I always used to sort of joke that she would see anti-Semitism everywhere, even when there wasn't there. And now I don't know if I agree with myself anymore.
That's what I was with my mom, and I feel like I've told this story. I tell this story like every episode. One of my survival jobs in my 20s is I worked at White House Black Market, the clothing store, and one of the women who worked there was like this retired woman who her husband had passed away, and she was Jewish. And we were talking, and she said, "I volunteer with the ADL," and I said, "Oh, what's that?" And she explained that it's an organization that studies and fights anti-Semitism. And I said, "Well, why do we need that? Why is that necessary in 2009 or whatever year it was?" And I was just at the ADL conference at the Javits Center, and I'm like, "Yep, we need people fighting anti-Semitism." So I think we all, we live in a post-October 7th world, and as people who grew up hearing about the Holocaust and our parents experienced anti-Semitism, it's really scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I am kind of I think I don't know if I can, whatever, if I'm weird or not, or if it's rare, but I dove in deep to intergenerational trauma and healing it in my own ways from I think I've been subconsciously doing it ever since I got out of my house.
I think we all have to some extent.
Yeah. But very consciously doing it from the ages of 25 till now. On a hungry, desperate search, spending every dollar I've ever made on bodywork and breath work and acupuncture and, reading the books and trying my darndest to understand it. So I have spent a lot of time, and I think it was an obsession of mine, and I'm still figuring it out. And also know that there's nothing, I don't need to figure it out, and, you can only do what you can do. But I guess the biggest eye-opening things for me was going to therapy, and then just becoming aware of the anxiety that lived in my body and the fear that lived in my body on such a deep level when I had a blessed life. I grew up really loved and beautifully, but there was such a deep level of pain and fear in my body that came out by me running and dating terrible people and making terrible decisions. And then when I, stopped to deal with it. So for me, it was physical ailments would come out. I had IBS from the age of 10 until I went to therapy and acupuncture. And then it went away when I learned how to calm my nervous system down. And then I had, whether it's a neck spasm or so my body, maybe being a dancer, but my body really was my way in for what is all within me. And it's such a personal journey, and I won't take, because I could talk about it truly forever, but it's something I avidly am seeking to understand all the time, and sometimes to a fault. But my show's about it, and it's I think it's kind of one of the purposes of my life, but just in what I love to do and how that was, not so the title of my show is 6 Million Jews Didn't Die for You Too, ... And it's something my grandmother said to me all the time, and it was, you know, a joke, and I never understood the gravity of it, but I think my body did. So like the first time I remember her saying it was when I was like 6 or 7, and she'd say like 6 million Jews didn't die for you to break your arm on the monkey bars. You know, like it was just this term that she'd throw out from fear and this crazy responsibility to live a safe, perfect life because we get to live. So, you know, and then it came out in high school when I had a Spanish boyfriend. She said 6 million Jews didn't die for you to date a Spaniard. And then she did say to me one day at dinner, 6 million Jews didn't die for you to be a dancer. And it was like an off the cuff thing, but that, you know, I carried it with me, and it was internally doing what it did. So for me, particularly, it was kind of my way. My art and intergenerational trauma are intertwined, and I'm so grateful. It's like such a weird thing to be grateful for now, but I understand it on so many different levels now as best I can. And my grandmother passed away when I was 18. So a lot started to change because she really had the stronghold on the family, and she was also the best, and we were also so close, and I was born on her birthday, and I was her favorite, you know, like so many wonderful memories with her too. But me and my mother have been able to have conversations where my mom said to me, like, Jan, I would never have been able to let you dance in that way while she was alive. Like, my mother's life was devoted to what my grandmother wanted for her. And so, you know, even as simple as like the clothing she'd wear. So I'm very grateful that my mom is capable of evolving and opening up, because we've had some very healing conversations around what has now been possible. But I would say it has affected every ounce of the way I grew up, but specifically because my mother chose to never leave her parents. We grew up 10 minutes away from them. We saw them 5 times a week, you know, like, and there's so much gorgeousness that came from, like, you want to say intergenerational, like magic, you know, is also there. But for me particularly, that has become like my life's work, to try to unravel, mainly just so I can keep transforming it, because that's what we all deserve for them too, like the ones who didn't get to live free within their own beings. So.
It's a lot of pressure, I think, not coming from this as a 3D, but I think just being a Jewish person in general is a lot of pressure, because I think we carry thousands of years of people who got away, people who dealt with insane conditions, and a lot of people I know, you know, they're expected to adhere to a higher standard, and that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
How about you, Shany?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I agree with everyone. I mean, we all have that going through the generations, but I feel like we felt it mostly around the table when my grandma, for example, she kept saying, like, you have to finish your plate. And so, because they didn't have a lot to eat, obviously you have to finish your plate. And so my mom kept saying, you have to finish your plate. And my mom is a person who, if she's going to hear this one, she's going to kill me. But
I know,
anyway,
I'm nervous now.
You're fine. It's my mom doesn't listen to my podcast. I literally told her last night, I am like practicing my Jewish mom guilt. I was like, it's fine, Mom. She laughed. I was like, I know I'm really funny. You'd know that if you listen to my podcast. I have more listeners in Frankfurt, Germany than in the house that I grew up in.
That's
which is a fact that I have more listeners on some random island in the Pacific Ocean than more people than people who live in the house that I grew up in. And my mom's like, I don't figure out how to do it. I was like, well, this has been going for a year and a half, and I can yeah.
Here's the link.
Yes, I know. Here's the information. If you would like to listen, it's fine. Like but okay, so go ahead and say what you're going to say.
So I wanted to say that my mom can't go like one meal. My sister is always mad about it, but she can't go one meal without having something for everyone. So, for example, it's Passover coming, right? And so my sister is about to host for the first time the whole family. Unfortunately, we're not going to be there, but my mom is really on her ass about having tofu. And like, she doesn't need tofu, she doesn't need it, but my other sister eats tofu. And she knows that her kids really like tofu. But there's no Passover kosher tofu. And my sister needs everything to be kosher for Passover. And so we have a real big problem now because my mom is like, how are we going to go through Passover without having tofu for the kids and for my other
This
sister?
is the question that Jews have been asking for thousands of years. How do you do
Right.
Passover without
It's
tofu?
really, you know, it's so important because it's not like she eats salads, potatoes, chicken, everything else that they're going to have there. And I mean, she has to have the tofu as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of our stories with every meal. Like, everyone needs to have everything. And if she doesn't have something that she knows someone likes, she's really frustrated about it. And like, we always have chicken and fish and like all the proteins. So you will make sure that she's going to make sure that you have everything you wanted and more. And you're going to have to finish your plate. So there's always too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because they didn't have enough and it went through this generation to pass to us. So that's one thing around the table. And then there's another thing that she always wanted us to be together in everything, and everything always has to be positive and happy. And if it's not positive and happy, then it's like she's taking it really personally. And so I feel like that comes from, they didn't have everyone together all the time. They lost people. We have to be together all the time. We have to be happy because we need to be thankful for being alive, which I agree, but it's also impossible to be happy all the time.
My mother was 5 when her sister died. Her sister was, I think, 11 or 12. And she has this like obsession with me and my sister getting along.
Yeah.
She's obsessed with it. Like, you're only going to have each other. You're when we're gone, blah, blah, blah. Because it's like, she lost this. So I can't imagine going through losing your entire family. Yeah. It's just like, obviously my life experience is very different, like my family story, but it's just so interesting how these things from your childhood kind of, can affect your great grandchildren.
Oh, absolutely.
And I feel it on me now. I mean, I have the same problem. I'd say that I need everything to always be perfect, and it's impossible for everything to always be perfect. And my husband is trying to tell me that. He's like, it's okay not to have everything as perfect as you think it should be. And so I can feel it going through the generations. My mom, I'm taking it now. I'm sure that my daughter will eventually.
No, and it's even like my own childhood trauma. Like, my husband's always like, don't put your childhood trauma on our daughter. It's hard not to. Like,
it'll be there regardless.
And like, we're in a time where we're all hyper aware of it. It's become, we're allowed to talk about it and see it. And like, we've become so privileged and comfortable in our lives. We have the time and the luxury to talk about it all. So it's the thing now, but it is impossible. And I can't heal it all. We can't heal it all. But I am very passionate about if and when you can have the privilege to become aware, like, what are you going to do about it? And it's a personal journey of, and so I think that brings us to all of our projects. Like, I don't want to speak for you guys, but if I can transform it in myself, that's the only, if I care to, that's my responsibility. And to me, what transforming it looks like is finding out who I really am underneath all of it and living as authentically as I can as me with the beautiful everything I've learned, but like, who am I? And I just think that's kind of a across the board human thing.
From that, and also actually from your mom's sister story is, again, not to make it about me and my personal trauma, but I also did lose my dad when I was quite young. And I feel like, funnily enough, ever since then, there has been this need that everything needs to be sort of. I feel like since then I developed an insane amount of impatience, essentially trying to get as much done as possible. And I think that's probably also true of, my mother was an incredible overachiever. Um, and I think there is something to that when you have experiences or have intergenerational traumas, particularly with death, and the idea of, spending as much time as possible, you're trying to make every moment count.
Yeah.
You don't want to waste any sort of moment. But what that also can mean is that you just run yourself into the ground.
Yeah.
And you, and so I have, I guess, this constant ticking time, ticking clock in my head, trying to get shit done. Sorry to swear, but as much as I can, because
Right. I think
what happens when it's all gone,
and the underlying thing I think is grief, like for all
Absolutely.
humanity, but especially for our tribe. It's like, when did they grieve? Did they grieve? When did our parents grieve about it? When have we grieved about, and there's this running from the present that I've felt in my, it was like, how can we obsess about the food? And wait, why aren't you all happy? And like what you were saying, Shany, like, how do we we're here, we have to be happy. But then there's so much pain in what happened.
Yeah.
I also want to say awareness. I mean, lack of awareness.
Yeah.
We never talked about it,
No.
in the house. You never talk about those things.
Like what actually happened and how they actually felt. And so this big thing, but it's never been like,
I
I
also want to add.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Nicole. I want to add that in our household, for example, therapy was not a thing. It's like,
yeah, no,
we don't
not
go
in
to
mine,
therapy.
not in mine either.
Yeah. So I feel like I hear it in a lot of Jewish houses.
I was in a
You don't need therapy.
I was in a mom's group through the JCC, and I said something like, well, I talked about my psychiatrist. She's like, you told them you go to a psychiatrist? I was like, this is a Jewish mom's group in the Upper West Side. Like, we're all seeing psychiatrists. Like, it's such a generational shame with the therapy. And I'm like, we're all in therapy.
Yeah.
We all need to be in therapy.
All of us.
They were so mad. They were so scared because they were just so scared. When I started going, they were like,
Wow.
why? Are you just talking about me? And I was like, well, yeah, I am.
I know. They always want to know if you're talking about
Exactly
something.
right.
Yes, I am talking
Yes,
about
Mom.
you.
Yes, I am.
And then my mom started saying things like, just blame me. It's just blame me for everything anyway. It's fine. Just go ahead and blame me.
Yeah. And I
Stop going. I will feel better if you blame me and stop
I
going.
also feel, Shany, that it is so culturally, Israel and America could probably not be more the difference too about it all for you growing up in Israel in a Holocaust survivor home. Like, of course, I could just imagine it being more of a just get the thing done. Like, I don't want to say warrior mentality, but like, you're in Israel also. You're not in America. It's a different,
Yeah, I agree. And I think that I'm saying it as unfortunately, I think that we are so used to being in such a crazy
Atmosphere.
atmosphere. But it's like, oh, it's the norm. I went to the army. It's like, it's part of the norm. And I would even say, like, when I went back during COVID times, and that there was all type of war starting, obviously, but there were some bombing and we needed to run to the shelter. And I freaked out because I haven't been for a while under that normal situation. So my husband was like, oh, it's fine. We have some time. I was like, what do you mean it's fine? I took the whole house. I was like, I need to take cookies with me. And he's like, why are you taking the cookies? I was like, I don't know if someone will, the sugar level will drop because they're nervous. And he's like, it's fine. It's like 2 minutes. You're in under the, in the room, and then you're coming back. And I'm like, what?
I'm sorry, did you say 2 minutes?
Yeah, you're like, 2 minutes. So I need to run. I was just like, I freaked out. Mm-hmm. And then as we kept going through the weeks and it kept happening, I was getting chill about it as well. I was like, oh, okay, we have 2 minutes. That's so long.
That's how long you go. Because I've never been to Israel, and I'm ashamed to admit that. But is that how long when there's
it depends where you at in the country. So like some areas you have 5 minutes to go in. Some places you have 10 seconds. Some places you have 2 minutes. 2 minutes is normal for like around Tel Aviv, for example. It depends where you hear it from as well. Like, is that coming from the Gaza area or is it coming from the northern area? So yeah, but you see, like I thought it was crazy how normal people felt about it. Like, okay, we have to do it, but like it's fine. Like you'll be there for a few minutes, 10 minutes, and then you're out again. And you're like, how do you just keep on going with your life right now? You know?
I think people are very adaptable, and something,
Yeah.
because I was just reading this chapter about transit camps, and I think the quote was, we just got used to it, talking about people dying. And I think that people, to get through things, they just get used to things and it becomes a normal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of my 2-part interview with the 3G Collective. So we have some exciting interviews as well as informational episodes coming up in the next few weeks. So be sure that you're subscribing, and also follow me on Instagram and my little baby TikTok. I've been posting a lot more videos, which I'm very excited about. I'm excited to see what the rest of the year brings. This is Nicole Kelly, and this has been She Brew in the City.